As we begin to close down 2021 and we look into 2022, there are so many critical questions facing each of our organizations, our industries, and frankly, the world as a whole. How we are going to construct not only value and value creation in the new year, but how are we going to rethink and redesign how we engage with one another in society, certainly in economic exchange, but also in terms of human exchange. So I would offer to you the story of Ferdinand Magellan as inspiration for how we can approach some of the most pressing problems that we face today. Many of you will be familiar with Magellan. You probably studied his voyage as a child, but you may not know some of the particulars behind his expedition and why over 500 years later, his journey is so outstanding and serves as inspiration for us, despite all of the challenges and despite the imperfections of him as a human and despite political perspectives, especially if you are either Portuguese or Spanish. But over 500 years ago, Magellan, originally of Portuguese descent, but ultimately sailing under the Spanish flag, began his expedition and set off from Spain on a historical journey. This was in the midst of the spice trade. This is in the midst of when really Spain and Portugal were kind of jostling for power. At the time, Magellan said, rather than using these kind of traditional approaches to map making and navigation, let's use an actual globe to take a look at what the circumnavigation would actually look like. And in proposing that, he made a counterintuitive proposal to the King of Spain at the time that to get to the East Indies, we would go west. So we would go west to reach the east, which seemed counterintuitive, but the king bought it and he began sailing all the way around and ultimately through what would become the Straits of Magellan, bearing his name, at the tip of South America to reach the Pacific Ocean and ultimately his whole arcada, although he would not be with it towards the end, would circumnavigate the globe for the first time. And this is the first time that we as humans actually got a sense of kind of getting our arms around the globe of like how we are all interconnected. So yes, it was a historical journey. It was an expedition of geographical and navigational import. But on a human level, it philosophically also helped us see and understand how we are all connected. And yes, I understand that this expedition was part of a broader kind of expansion of commercial and economic pursuits that ultimately one might say fueled globalization, right, in terms of the interconnectedness of markets. And yet at some kind of human level, as those from the expedition came back and news of their expedition traveled throughout Europe, we began to understand how we thought we were once distinct and very different from one another, but there was quite a lot of interconnectivity. And in fact, those that sailed with Magellan were actually a very diverse cross-cultural team as well. So a couple of things to take with us as we consider some of the challenges in 2022. Magellan, for all of his imperfections, and you can read about it in many different history texts, and there were certainly a lot of challenges on those voyages, he was willing to be counterintuitive, contrarian, going after something that was not thought possible, and then facing it into the unknown with a diversity of others who were willing to go after something that they didn't know necessarily existed, but that they were willing to explore from a variety of different perspectives. And so if we think about the challenges that we're facing today, two questions come to mind. How might we challenge ourselves to go against the prevailing assumptions of what the norm is, what the narrative is, what the predominant way of thinking is, and consider that there may be another path forward? And secondly, how might we look for ways that ultimately, even when there are two diverse perspectives that are completely seemingly opposite, how might we be reaching actually for the same thing And maybe we're more united than we are divided, like two ends of a paradox, two sides that are seemingly opposite and actually need one another because they're actually complementary in the end. I wonder what might happen to the challenges that we're facing as a whole if we brought a couple of those perspectives to bear. Try it out and let me know what you find.